Alright, so I promised I'd make this video, and this is going to be about the question types on the MMI. We already discussed the general overview of the MMI, but I now want to focus on the specific question types. Um, Now, let me just review a little bit. So, the MMI, as mentioned in my earlier video, and if you haven't seen that, you should go ahead and watch the earlier video. I'll put a link right there. Go ahead and watch it. But remember that the MMI composed of multiple mini interviews, about 8 to 10 stations, and each one of them is going to be about 8 to 10 minutes long, and each of them is literally going to be a mini interview. And remember, each station is usually broken into two parts. The first part of the station includes looking at the door and reading the prompt for 2 minutes and analyzing it. And the second part of the station is going into the door and actually spending 8 minutes to answer the prompt. And now I'm going to go into what the prompts can be. The prompts usually occur in three main categories, and I'm going to go over these three categories. These three categories include general questions, scenario questions, and task-based questions. And so we're going to discuss what these mean. These are just the names I've given them because I've read a lot. I've done a lot of research on these, but you can name them however you want, and you'll see that they're pretty distinct from with number one, which includes general questions. So what does that mean? So general questions are usually questions you'd get in a traditional interview, and what that actually means is these are questions that are very typical and usually based off of your application. Because remember, some traditional interviews can be open file, which means they have access to it. So some of these example questions are listed right there down here, and you'll see it's something like, tell me about yourself, or um, how do you overcome challenges, or something about tell me about activity X, or tell me about activity Y. And in this case, the prompt right in front of the door will literally be tell me about yourself, or tell me about activity X, or even something like how do you overcome challenges, or etc. And you'd spend 2 minutes thinking about it, and you'd go in and kind of give like an 8-minute answer. The one thing that is different about these stations, though, is that the interviewer, let's say you end a bit early, can actually ask you follow-up questions. So, if you end up answering the question, you have 2 minutes left, the interviewer might be like, so tell me more about, this specific example you used, or tell me more about this specific situation. And in this case, you can actually engage with the interviewer and kind of, much like in a traditional interview, actually get to your point and get them to understand you on a personal level. So those are general questions, and that's one of the question types that can be posted on the door. What's the second question type? The second question type are scenario questions. So these are entirely different. These are things you would never find in a traditional interview. Scenario questions are usually regarding situations you may encounter as a doctor. So what does this mean? This literally means that they can be very stressful because, first of all, you're not a doctor yet. And so you might not even know how to deal with some of these situations, but you kind of have to, before any MMI, what I always do is Google, typical MMI examples and look over some of these ethical questions because some of them can be pretty insanely difficult to handle. Um, the things that makes the most difficult scenario questions are medical ethic questions. So if you're not familiar with medical ethics, it often can be very difficult because you're at a crossroads between two main things. So let me give you an example. So one of the place where I got this question is listed in the description because I always cite my sources. But basically, look, it says a patient is diagnosed with HIV and reveals to their general practitioner that they have not disclosed this information to their partner. Discuss the ethical issues involved. So now you literally have to pretend, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the physician of this patient and discuss what's important. Because remember, HIV can be transmitted through sexual intercourse. It can also be transmitted through blood. So if this patient hasn't disclosed his or her information to her partner or his partner, it can be very difficult because they putting their other hand, the patient himself or herself might feel might not want to disclose this information because he or she might be afraid it's threatening the relationship with his or her partner. So these types of things, again, see, that's a crossroads. You have to figure out what's the best for the patients, what's the best for the community, and you have to kind of play with that in your head and come up with a reasonable answer. And I can make a whole video on how to approach these types of questions, but they can be difficult. These are the second types of questions you can be asked as a prompt, and you'd have to think about it for 2 minutes and go in there and discuss the ethical issues involved. The third type of question is going to be collaborative questions. So collaborative questions literally involve you collaborating with either the interviewer or even another applicant and accomplishing a task. Um, I didn't actually cite my source for this one, but I used an MMI video, and that video actually has really good collaborative question examples. So I'm going to go ahead and cite that as source number 2 in the description. So use that. But some of the collaborative questions can you might have some puzzle in front of you, and you have to tell another applicant how to assemble that puzzle, assuming they don't know what you're looking at. So you have to communicate what you see or what the puzzle looks like, and tell the applicant to fix it, or to make the puzzle as you see it in front of you. So this kind of stuff can be really difficult because you'll be surprised at how hard it is to describe something when someone else has no idea. Some other examples I've known is like you might have the instructions to how to make a piece of origami in front of you, and you have to relay those instructions to your partner and see if you can actually communicate how to make this origami structure effectively. And your partner doesn't have the instructions, so you have to figure it out how you're going to communicate it effectively. But yeah, those are the types of collaborative questions, and it can be really difficult to answer these, so you need to practice. For almost all 3 of these questions, you need some aspect of practice. Now, putting it all together. So remember there are 10 stations. So of those 10 stations, you'll have 10 questions. By the way, 10 is not absolute. I'm just saying 10 generically. Some schools have 6, other schools have 8, other schools have 10, other schools might have 7. It all totally depends on the school. So let's assume they have 10. Any of those 10 stations will have questions that basically fall into one of these 3 categories. They're mutually exclusive for the most part. I have very rarely seen them overlap. But with that being said, you should be more well informed about these questions, because that will give you the means to attack them and approach them in a appropriate manner. Now remember, these may or may not be equally distributed. And that means of your 10 stations, maybe 6 of them are scenario based, 2 of them are just general questions, and 2 of them are collaborative. You could have 8 questions and maybe 7 of them are scenario based, and 1 of them is just about medicine. You have 0 collaborative. You could have 8 completely collaborative, 1 about general, and another one just about scenario. So they can be equally distributed, and they're in random order, completely random. And so just because you have 1 collaborative question does not mean the next one's collaborative. Just because you have 1 scenario question does not mean the next one's scenario. Just because you have 1 general question does not mean the next one's general. Mutually exclusive, independent. And the last thing I'm going to say is some MMIs may or may not include a rest station. So what that means is, remember, you'll have 10 stations. Maybe 1 of them will be a rest station. So between station 5 and 6, you go and you have a rest station so you can use the bathroom, get some water, and kind of just unload. So with that being said, hopefully this gives you more insight into the question types. I can definitely give you guys some scenarios that are very common and give you ways to attack them in some future videos. But for now, I'm really hoping this gave you more insight. Alright, if you appreciated it, give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks.